I had been away for just a few days, barely long enough to miss the comfort of my own home, or so I thought. The moment I reached the familiar building, the familiar door that I had unlocked 1,000 times, my heart sank. My key didn't fit. I tried it again, twisting, jiggling, even forcing it slightly, hoping that maybe the lock had just stiffened a bit. But no matter what I did, it refused to turn. My hands started shaking, a cold sweat running down my back. I stepped back and looked around nervously, thinking perhaps I had grabbed the wrong key from my bag. But no, this was my key, the one I always used, the one I had entrusted to my own home. I felt an icy grip of fear spread through me, something that I hadn't experienced in years. My mind was racing. How could this be? Was it possible someone had changed the lock while I was away? Or had my son done something? I couldn't fathom it. My voice caught in my throat as I pulled out my phone and called him. "Hello," he answered, sounding casual, like nothing was wrong. "Hey, my key isn't working," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do you mean?" He replied, a little too calmly. My stomach dropped. There was something in his tone, a kind of forced normalcy, that made my chest tighten. "I can't get into my own house," I said more firmly this time, and then he said it. "Oh, yeah, we changed the locks." That simple sentence slammed into me like a hammer. "We, my son, my own flesh and blood." My voice faltered. "Wait, what, you changed the locks without telling me?" There was a pause, a silence that felt like it lasted an eternity. "Yeah, Mom, we thought it was time," he said casually, as if we were discussing the weather. I felt my world tilt, spinning off its axis. How could he decide something like that without even telling me? My home, my sanctuary, the place where I had built my life, my memories. It wasn't mine anymore, apparently. I remember standing there in the cold evening air, my bag slung over my shoulder, staring at my front door, unable to comprehend how quickly everything had changed in just a few days. I felt a cocktail of disbelief, anger, and betrayal swirl in my chest. My mind raced back through the days leading up to this moment. My son, always so helpful, always the one to check on me when I traveled. The calls, the texts, the little reminders about dinner plans, doctor appointments, even the mundane things I had taken for granted. All of it felt like a carefully orchestrated act, and now, in the span of a few hours, it was all gone. I thought about calling my daughter, but even that felt futile. She lived miles away, busy with her own life, and honestly, I needed someone who could explain why this was happening, why my son had taken such a drastic step without any warning. I sat down on the curb, my hands clutching the key, staring blankly at the door. The neighborhood, usually comforting with its familiar faces and warm lights, now felt alien, hostile almost. I could feel the eyes of a few neighbors as they passed, some giving sympathetic glances, others with curious stares. I felt exposed, humiliated even, like a stranger being barred from her own home. I thought about knocking on my neighbor's door, but pride and the sheer absurdity of the situation held me back. My son, the one person I had trusted implicitly, had effectively turned my life upside down. I couldn't even process what had led to this. In the past few days, had I done something wrong? Had I said something hurtful? My mind reeled, going through every interaction with him over the past months. And then it hit me. There had been tension, subtle at first, things I hadn't wanted to notice. Arguments about money, little comments about how I managed the house, offhand remarks about me needing more help than I realized. I had brushed them off, thinking that I was just overreacting, that this was normal in any parent-child relationship. But now, standing there with a key that wouldn't turn, I realized those tiny sparks had grown into a wildfire. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, the kind of tears that weren't just sadness. They were confusion, betrayal, and disbelief all wrapped into one. I remember gripping the key so tightly my knuckles turned white, my chest heaving. I tried to call my son again, hoping perhaps I had misunderstood him, hoping that maybe there was a reasonable explanation. "Mom, we just thought it was for the best," he said when I called. For the best of whom? I demanded, my voice cracking. "You, Mom, we thought you needed more structure, more safety," he said, his voice calm, almost rehearsed. Safety from what? From me? The absurdity of it made my hands shake harder. The thought that my own child could decide unilaterally that I was incapable of managing my own home sent a shockwave through me. I paced back and forth in front of the building, my mind trying desperately to piece together what had happened. The more I thought about it, the more I remembered small incidents, tiny hints that perhaps this wasn't coming out of nowhere. The sudden need for him to check in, the insistence on helping with everything, the subtle suggestions that I wasn't doing things correctly. Maybe it had all been leading to this moment. And now, I was faced with the reality that my autonomy had been stripped from me without my consent. I sat down again, phone in hand, scrolling through messages, trying to find some clue, some evidence that would explain why he felt entitled to do this. I kept asking myself if I had missed signs, if there were moments where I should have spoken up, defended myself. But nothing prepared me for this. Nothing prepared me for the humiliation of being locked out of my own house by the very person I had raised and trusted. My neighbors, who occasionally waved or stopped for a chat, now seemed distant, almost judging. I felt isolated, alone, as if the world had shrunk around me, leaving me standing on the street with nothing but confusion and anger. I thought about calling the police, maybe reporting a break-in, but the thought of them coming and seeing me standing outside my own home, locked out by my son, filled me with dread. It wasn't just about the lock, it was about what it represented. The disregard for my feelings, the erosion of trust, the violation of the bond I had always believed was unbreakable. As I sat there, trying to make sense of everything, I remembered my late husband's words about family. He had always said, "Trust is fragile. Once broken, it takes years to mend." I had never thought I would be in a position to understand the full weight of those words, yet here I was, living them in the most visceral way possible. I decided to try reasoning with my son one last time. I called, and again, the casual tone in his voice made me ache. "Mom, we're just trying to help," he said, like a mantra. "Help?" I echoed, voice trembling. By locking me out of my own home, there was a pause. I could hear him swallowing, a subtle sign of hesitation. But then he said, "Mom, you'll understand one day. We're doing this for your own good." That line, "for your own good," hit me like a slap. It wasn't just the lock. It was the condescension, the assumption that I was incapable of managing my life, that my son had the authority to decide what was best for me. I felt my anger boil over, tears streaming down my face. I screamed into the phone, "I am not a child. I am not someone who needs to be controlled. This is my home, my life, my choices." The silence on the other end was deafening. For the first time, I sensed hesitation, a crack in his composure. But it wasn't enough. He simply said, "We'll talk when you calm down." And then, as if to punctuate the cruelty, he hung up. I remember dropping the phone, feeling numb, the weight of betrayal pressing down on me. I sat on the curb for what felt like hours, trying to breathe, trying to process what had happened. How had it come to this? My own son, my flesh and blood, had effectively erased my sense of home, my security, my autonomy. The night began to fall, the streetlights flickering on one by one, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward me, as if the world itself was mocking my helplessness. I felt an urge rising inside me, something I hadn't felt in years. Not just sadness, not just confusion, but a fire of determination. I wasn't going to let this go without understanding, without confronting him, without reclaiming what was mine. I thought back to every family argument, every disagreement, and a plan began to form in my mind. Not a plan of revenge in the violent sense, but a plan to assert myself, to make him realize the magnitude of what he had done. I knew I needed to be calm, to approach this strategically. If I let anger control me, it would only give him an excuse to dismiss me further. I needed leverage. I needed a way to get inside and confront him, not just verbally, but in a way that made him understand the gravity of his actions. I started pacing, brainstorming every possible approach. Maybe I could talk to my neighbors, gather witnesses to show him that his actions weren't just affecting him and me. They were visible, observable, and shocking to everyone around. Maybe I could involve authorities, not in a legal sense, but as a way to demonstrate that his behavior was unacceptable. My mind was racing, a whirlwind of thoughts, each one tinged with anger, hurt, and a desperate need for justice. And then I remembered something, a key detail he had mentioned casually during one of my recent visits. Something about a spare key, a trusted friend, someone he always relied on. Could it be that he had given access to someone else? My pulse quickened. If I could find out who had access, maybe I could leverage that to confront him, to take back control, to make him see that his actions had consequences. I felt a strange mix of fear and excitement. This was no longer just about getting inside my home. It was about reclaiming my sense of self, my dignity, my authority as a parent and as a person. I knew I couldn't rush. I needed to wait, observe, gather information. The night grew colder, the street quiet, and I remained on the curb, clutching my key, my mind ablaze with plans and strategies. I knew that tomorrow would bring confrontation, questions, and possibly the start of a reckoning that I had long dreaded but now was inevitable. The first step, I realized, was understanding. Understanding why he felt justified, why he thought he could control me in my own home, why he could disregard every boundary, every ounce of trust and respect I had placed in him. I knew it wouldn't be easy, that this confrontation could change our relationship forever and maybe even shatter it completely, but I also knew I couldn't turn back. I couldn't ignore the betrayal, couldn't pretend that everything was normal. Something deep inside me had shifted. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was someone fighting for her life, her autonomy, her very identity, and I was determined that my son would see, truly see, the weight of what he had done. As the night wore on, I sat there, the chill in the air doing nothing to dampen the fire burning in my chest, rehearsing what I would say, what I would demand, how I would reclaim my space, my home, my life. I didn't yet know what the outcome would be, but I knew that I wasn't going to be passive. I had been hurt, humiliated, betrayed, but I was not defeated. Tomorrow I would face him. Tomorrow I would demand answers. Tomorrow my life would change, one way or another. And in the quiet darkness, alone on the street, clutching a key that no longer worked, I made a silent vow. I would not be ignored. I would not be controlled. I would reclaim my home, my voice, my power. And whatever it took, he would understand that he had crossed a line that could never, ever be uncrossed. The next morning, I woke up with a mix of dread and determination. Sleep had been almost non-existent, my mind replaying every possible scenario over and over. I had thought about just leaving, finding a hotel, pretending everything was fine, but that idea made my stomach turn. No, I had to confront him. I had to understand why my own son had taken such a drastic step, why he had felt he had the right to take over my home without even telling me. I showered slowly, my hands still trembling, my reflection in the mirror revealing the exhaustion, the hurt, and the simmering anger that refused to subside. Every line on my face seemed sharper, more defined by stress, by betrayal. I thought about how long it had been since I felt so powerless, so disregarded. The key still sat on the counter, a symbol of everything that had shifted in my life overnight. I picked it up, turning it over in my hand, letting its weight remind me that it was more than just a piece of metal. It represented the life I had built, the independence I had fought for, and the respect I expected from my own family. As I left the hotel and walked toward my home, the streets that were once comforting now seemed oppressive, crowded with invisible judgment. I could feel eyes on me, strangers whispering about my predicament, and I imagined every neighbor noticing my approach, wondering why I wasn't inside my own house. my stomach twisted with a mix of anxiety and resolve. I reached my doorstep, looking at the lock once again, the barrier between me and my home, and I realized that it wasn't just the door I needed to get past. It was my son, the person who had crossed a line that should never have been crossed. I called him again, my hands shaking slightly, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mom, what now?" he asked. His tone was casual, almost taunting. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him that casual tones didn't belong in conversations like this. "I'm coming in," I said, my voice firm. "We need to talk, face to face, now." There was a silence and I could sense him hesitating. "Mom, I don't think, no excuses, I'm your mother. I deserve answers." The line went dead and I took that as my cue. I walked around to the side door, scanning for cameras, checking for any witnesses, and then I remembered something that made my pulse race. A friend of his had a spare key. I didn't know the details, but if I could get access through that, I could finally confront him inside my own home. I walked quickly to the back of the building, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't know exactly what I was doing, but I knew I couldn't wait any longer. And then, like a small miracle, I found the door slightly ajar, enough to slip in unnoticed. My pulse leapt, part fear, part adrenaline. I stepped carefully inside, the familiar smell of my home hitting me immediately. Dust, old furniture, the faint aroma of my morning coffee that I always kept ready for myself. Everything was the same, yet nothing felt the same. The security, the comfort, the feeling that this was my space, it had all been stripped away in a single, cruel act. I crept down the hallway, hearing voices. My son was talking to someone on the phone, his voice too casual, too confident. I could hear snippets. "Yeah, she won't know, just follow my instructions." My stomach turned, my anger spiking. Instructions? What instructions? Who was he involving in this? I stepped closer, trying to hear more, and realized the extent of what he had done. He wasn't just controlling the locks. He had planned, orchestrated, manipulated. It was a calculated move, not a moment of concern or misguided love as he had claimed. This realization fueled something inside me. I wasn't just going to talk. I was going to make him understand the magnitude of what he had done. I slammed my hand against the wall, startling him, and suddenly he turned, surprise and guilt flashing across his face. "Mom, you can't just," I cut him off. "I've been locked out of my own home. My son, my own child, has decided that I'm incapable of managing my life. Do you have any idea how that feels?" My voice shook with emotion, tears streaming down my face. "I trusted you, I raised you, and this is how you repay me." He tried to approach me, but I stepped back, keeping a defensive stance. "No, not until you explain every single thing, every reason, every justification, every lie you told yourself to think this was acceptable. I want the truth now." The room was silent except for our heavy breathing. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes darted away, trying to avoid mine. I wasn't going to let him look away. "Why, son?" I asked softly, almost whispering now, my anger mingling with despair. "Why did you think you had the right to do this?" He finally looked at me, his eyes red, his lips trembling slightly. "Mom, I just wanted to help," he said, his voice breaking. "Help?" I repeated, incredulous. "By taking away my home, by treating me like a child." He didn't answer immediately. I could see the internal battle inside him. Guilt, fear, confusion. But it wasn't enough. I had to make him understand the weight of his actions. Do you know how humiliating it was to stand on the street, watching my own home, thinking I had no right to enter? Do you know how powerless I felt? I took a deep breath, letting the words sink in. I have spent my entire life working, struggling, building a space that was mine, and you, my own son, decided that none of that mattered. I could see him faltering, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. His defenses were cracking. I didn't realize. He whispered, "You didn't realize." I repeated, my voice rising. You didn't realize. You knew exactly what you were doing. You knew it would hurt me. You knew it would break the trust between us." He opened his mouth, but I held up a hand, stopping him. "No more excuses. Not a single word about your intentions. I want actions. I want proof that you understand the gravity of what you've done." I could see tears forming in his eyes now, and I realized that my confrontation, my refusal to accept half-hearted explanations, was getting through to him. The tension in the room was palpable. I remembered every conversation we had had over the past months, every subtle manipulation, every little control tactic he had used. I laid it all out, each accusation punctuated by my shaking voice, my tears, my trembling hands. He couldn't interrupt, he couldn't deflect. The truth was laid bare, and finally, he saw it. The silence stretched for what felt like hours, and then he said, almost in a whisper, I'm sorry, Mom, I didn't realize. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I understand now, I overstepped. That word, sorry, felt both heavy and light at the same time. Heavy with the weight of everything that had happened, but light because it meant recognition, acknowledgement, and a glimmer of hope that the bond we had wasn't irreparably broken. I took a deep breath, calming myself. "Apologies are just words," I said, my voice steadier now. "I need to see respect. I need to see boundaries acknowledged, and I need to know that this will never happen again." He nodded, his eyes filled with remorse. "It won't, Mom, I promise." I felt a mixture of relief and lingering anger. The confrontation had been cathartic, but the trust that had been broken would take time to rebuild. I sat down, finally allowing myself to rest, feeling the adrenaline drain from my body. The home that had once felt alien now began to feel familiar again, the sense of safety returning slowly, cautiously. I realized that this was more than just about locks or keys. It was about respect, autonomy, and the recognition that even the people we love most can make mistakes, sometimes devastating ones, but also have the capacity to acknowledge them and change. Over the next few days, I worked with my son to repair the damage. We had long conversations, sometimes heated, sometimes tearful, about boundaries, respect, and the importance of communication. It wasn't easy, and some days the tension would flare again, but gradually, a new understanding emerged. I learned that love sometimes requires confrontation, that silence in the face of wrongdoing only strengthens the wrong, and that asserting oneself, even against those we care for most, is sometimes necessary to preserve dignity and self-respect. And as I finally walked through my home, key in hand, I felt a renewed sense of power and confidence. This was my life, my space, my choices. And while the wounds of betrayal might linger, the strength I had found in standing up for myself was undeniable. So, to anyone watching, remember this: never let anyone, even family, strip you of your voice or autonomy. Speak up, stand firm, and demand the respect you deserve. And if you've ever been in a situation like this, I want you to share your thoughts below. Tell me, would you have confronted your son the way I did? Or would you have walked away? Let me know, because your experiences matter, and sometimes sharing them can help someone else find their courage. If you were on my side, hit that like button. If you want more stories of real life drama, betrayal, and ultimate confrontation, subscribe for more, and leave your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. I want to hear your take. Life throws us curveballs we never see coming, but how we react, how we reclaim our power, that's what defines us. I'll see you all in the next story.